Have you ever heard of a decision so quiet, so simple, yet powerful enough to shake an entire royal household? Not a scandal, not a political crisis, not a newspaper headline, but a choice made because of love, the kind the world rarely notices at first. Somewhere inside one of the United Kingdom's most guarded royal estates, long before the public ever knew, there was a moment when a senior royal dismissed his full domestic staff, yet raised his hand and said, "One person stays." Not an advisor, not a duke, not someone groomed for palace life, but a Filipino nanny named Amelia Santos. Most would never expect a woman like her to change a royal family. Yet sometimes, the smallest voice becomes the one the world remembers. Amelia did not arrive with confidence. She landed in London on a fog-heavy morning where the sky looked more like steel than cloud. The wind bit through her thin coat as if trying to test her resolve before she even took her first step. She paused outside the airport exit, clutching the handle of her old suitcase, its leather edges worn, its zipper slightly crooked from years of travel. Inside it were only the essentials, a couple of dresses, neatly folded uniforms, a sweater her mother knitted years ago, and a rosary wrapped carefully inside a handkerchief. The rosary wasn't just an object, it was a reminder of home, of the small wooden house back in Iloilo, of Sunday mornings filled with soft church bells, of family prayers whispered together during storms. With trembling hands, she tucked the rosary deeper into her pocket, as if its presence gave her the courage her words could not. She had no title, no prestigious education, no family name that opened doors. She was simply Amelia Santos, a quiet woman who had spent years working abroad, caring for other people's children. A woman who sent home nearly every pound she earned so her younger siblings could stay in school, so her mother could buy medicine, so her family could breathe a little easier. Never in her childhood dreams, or even her adult ones, did she imagine stepping foot inside a palace. And certainly not as someone being trusted with the care of a royal child. Yet here she was, escorted through iron gates taller than any building she'd grown up near, walking past manicured gardens and stone statues that stared down at her with centuries of history carved into their presence. On her first day she barely spoke. Her good morning was soft, her smile polite, small, almost apologetic. Her steps light, as if afraid her footsteps alone might disturb the rhythm of the place. She bowed her head respectfully to everyone, even those who didn't notice her. She listened far more than she talked, careful not to misstep, not physically and not socially. Every movement was measured, every breath felt monitored. She entered the palace nursery like someone entering holy ground, slow, thoughtful, reverent. Some staff observed her with quiet curiosity. Most, however, barely noticed her at all. To them she was temporary, a contract worker meant to fill a space until a more suitable replacement arrived. Someone with credentials from elite childcare academies. Someone trained in palace etiquette and protocol. To them, Amelia looked ordinary, replaceable. Just one more name on an endless staff list. One more uniform, one more face that would come and go. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that beneath her quiet presence lived something rare, a patience shaped by hardship, a gentleness taught by experience, and a love that did not need recognition to exist. She seemed small in that grand environment. But the truth? She carried something the palace had forgotten it needed. They thought she was just another nanny. But they were wrong. So very wrong. The bond began on a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky feels heavy and quiet, as if the world is holding its breath. Outside, raindrops streamed down the palace windows in long, trembling lines. Thunder rumbled softly in the distance, creating a rhythm that echoed through the long corridors. The scent of wet stone and polished wood filled the air, and the palace, usually busy with footsteps and routine, felt unusually still. Inside the nursery, the young heir, barely 3 years old, was unraveling. He had endured a full day of structure, pronunciation drills, posture correction, etiquette practice, timed meals, developmental play sessions, all designed to prepare him for a life he did not yet understand. To everyone else, he was a future symbol. To Amelia, he was just a child. The frustration building inside him finally spilled over. His lip trembled, his small shoulders shook, and tears gathered in his eyes until finally he cried. Not loudly, not defiantly, but in a soft, aching way, the kind that bypasses logic and goes straight to the heart. 2 staff members rushed to intervene, moving with the urgency of people trained to solve a problem quickly and efficiently. They tried soothing scripts, repositioning toys, even offering a chocolate biscuit, something normally reserved as a reward. But nothing worked. The crying grew more fragile, more desperate, not the sound of misbehavior, but of overwhelm. Amelia stood nearby, hands tucked gently in front of her. She didn't interrupt. She didn't attempt to correct or impress. She simply watched, not the behavior, but the child beneath it. She recognized the shaking shoulders, the gulping breaths, the fear hidden beneath exhaustion. She'd seen this countless times, not in royal halls, but in small houses, cramped apartments, and quiet homes where children longed simply to be held. Then, softly, almost shyly, she stepped forward. She didn't ask permission. She didn't wait for instruction. She just moved with the instinct of someone who understood what love looked like in moments of unraveling. Slowly she lifted the child into her arms. Not with haste, but with reverence, as if she were holding something fragile, sacred. The child didn't resist. He leaned into her, as though some part of him had been waiting. She wrapped him gently against her chest, her hand resting lightly on his back, and then she whispered, not in English, not in formal training language, but in Tagalog. Hush now, mahal. Ligtas ka. Hush, my love. You are safe. Her voice was soft, not a command, but a lullaby. Soft like waves meeting the shore, soft like a memory of home. Slowly the child's breathing steadied. Slowly his hands loosened from fists into open palms. Slowly the storm inside him quieted. The room changed. Tension dissolved. Order no longer felt forced. Even the rain outside seemed gentler. For the first time that day, there was peace. From the doorway, a housekeeper watched with wide eyes, her hand resting against her chest as if steadying her own heartbeat. Later she whispered to another staff member. She didn't just calm him, she changed the air in the room. And that was the moment, the very beginning, when someone realized this woman was not temporary, she was necessary. Weeks passed, and while routines shifted and schedules changed, one thing remained constant. Amelia never boasted about her role. She didn't seek praise, nor did she expect any. She moved through the palace with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that true care isn't announced, it is lived. Every evening, when other staff finished their responsibilities and disappeared to their quarters, Amelia stayed. She ironed tiny shirts and trousers, smoothing each seam with deliberate tenderness. Sometimes she hummed lullabies from home, soft melodies carried from childhood evenings spent listening to her mother sing while folding laundry. She hand-washed stuffed toys, not because the machines couldn't, but because the child once pressed his face to one fresh from the wash and whispered, "It smells like love." From that moment on, she washed them by hand, slowly, carefully, letting them dry near the window so the sunlight could warm the fabric. She woke before dawn, always moving quietly so the palace slept on. Feeding time wasn't merely a task, it was a moment to hold warmth, to whisper encouragement, to let love replace loneliness. And on nights when fever returned, as it sometimes did, she never left the bedside. While the palace slept, Amelia kept watch. She wiped his forehead with cool cloths. She murmured prayers meant to steady fear. She stayed alert, even when exhaustion clung to her like weight. Others watched the clock. She watched over a child, and somewhere in that rhythm, something began to change. Sometimes, late at night, when corridor lights dimmed and the palace fell into deep silence, the royal would walk past the nursery on his way to his study or to check on documents waiting on his desk. But more than once, he paused. Through the crack of the slightly open door, he saw her. Amelia sitting beside the child's bed, back slightly bent, eyelids heavy, shoulders tired from the long day. Yet her hand, always, rested gently on the small back, rising and falling with steady breaths. She wasn't simply doing a job. She was guarding a heartbeat. She never noticed him watching, but he noticed everything. The devotion, the patience, the tenderness no training manual could teach. He noticed the way the child's face softened in sleep whenever she was near, as if her presence alone kept nightmares away. He noticed how she never rushed, never complained, never allowed fatigue to harden her spirit. He noticed that the love she gave wasn't measured, it simply flowed. And with each passing night, each quiet scene of unwavering care, something began to stir inside him. Respect, gratitude, and a realization that titles may define importance in the outside world, but inside this room, inside this sacred space of childhood and vulnerability, it was Amelia who mattered most. She didn't know it yet, but the quiet work she did, unnoticed by many, was changing everything. Then one winter morning, everything changed. The season had crept in with icy grey skies, breath turning visible in the air, and frost climbing across the palace windows like delicate white veins. The gardens outside lay still beneath a thin blanket of snow, and the palace felt colder, not just in temperature, but in spirit. That was the morning the new estate manager arrived. He walked with sharp, clipped footsteps and carried himself with the confidence of someone used to making decisions others would simply have to accept. His suit was perfectly pressed, his voice precise, and his eyes observed everything with the scrutiny of a man scanning for weaknesses. He had one goal: modernization, efficiency, restructuring. And soon the atmosphere shifted. Small whispers traveled through the halls like winter wind slipping under doors. Contracts are being reviewed. Positions may be consolidated. No one knows who will stay. Staff who had worked there for decades straightened their uniforms, hoping their loyalty would be enough. Others moved with quiet nerves, rewriting routines in their heads, rehearsing explanations, preparing for outcomes they could not predict. Amelia said nothing. She simply continued working. But she felt that tension pressing through the walls, heavy, uncertain, cold. Then came the announcement: a mandatory gathering. No exceptions. When the appointed hour arrived, the staff assembled in a long, formal hall, the kind used for important decisions and ceremonial addresses. The high ceilings held echoes of history, while portraits of past royals looked down as if silently judging the moment. People stood stiffly, hands behind their backs, eyes forward. Amelia found her place near the rear, her posture small, humble, almost apologetic, as though she still questioned whether she belonged among people with years of seniority and polished resumes. At the front, the estate manager stepped forward and opened a folder. His expression was unemotional, clinical, detached. His first words cut through the silence like cold steel. Every household position will be dissolved. A new team will be appointed. The hall seemed to freeze. No one breathed. Shock rippled through the room in waves. Some swallowed hard. Others stared straight ahead, stunned. More than one pair of hands shook. These were not just jobs. These were lives, homes, identities built over decades of service. Amelia's heart pounded. She remained still, though she felt small, almost invisible, standing in a room where titles carried weight she didn't have. Then, something unexpected happened. Before the estate manager could continue, the doors at the far end of the hall opened. A hush fell instantly. The senior royal entered. His presence alone was enough to straighten spines and stop murmurs mid-breath. He rarely attended meetings like this, which meant whatever he was about to say mattered, deeply. He walked forward without rush, each step deliberate. When he reached the center, he paused, not looking at papers, not at the estate manager, but at the staff before him. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, in a voice calm but impossible to ignore, he said, "One employee will not be released." The estate manager blinked, taken off guard. Everyone waited. Slowly the royal turned his gaze toward the back of the room, toward the quiet woman with lowered eyes and her hands clasped behind her, as if trying to occupy as little space as possible. "Miss Santos will remain." Amelia lifted her head, stunned. The royal continued, "Under my personal authority." Gasps, murmurs. A few eyes widened, others narrowed. A nanny, protected when all others faced dismissal? Unthinkable, but the royal wasn't finished. His tone grew firmer, not harsh, but resolute. "Her contract will not end. It will expand." Silence stretched out, not empty but full of disbelief, full of realization, full of the understanding that something quietly monumental had just occurred. In a palace built on centuries of protocol, loyalty had outweighed hierarchy, and love had rewritten structure. And with that moment, without ceremony, without applause, something shifted, something ancient, something unspoken. A new chapter had begun, one where a woman who entered unnoticed was now the one person the palace could not imagine losing. Some still questioned the decision, until the night everything became clear. It happened on a freezing winter evening, one so silent and heavy that even the palace seemed to sense something coming. Snow drifted softly outside, blanketing the gardens in white and pressing darkness against the tall windows. The fireplaces glowed, but the chill in the halls lingered, the kind of cold that sinks deeper than skin. Inside the nursery, toys lay scattered across a plush rug. The young heir had been laughing only moments earlier, building tall wooden towers and knocking them over with squeals of delight. Then, suddenly, his laughter stopped. His body swayed, his skin flushed, and before anyone could react, the little boy collapsed onto the floor. Everything changed in an instant. A royal aide shouted for help. Footsteps echoed. Doors swung open. Doctors rushed in, medical bags thudding against their sides as they hurried. Orders were given sharply. "Move the toys. Check temperature. Call the pediatric consultant." Staff scrambled, careful but frantic, as panic crept through even the most disciplined professionals. The palace, usually so composed and controlled, shifted into a quiet storm of urgency. Amelia stood near the doorway, frozen, hands pressed tightly together as she watched the doctors work. She knew fevers. She had soothed countless children through nights of fear and high temperature. But this was different. This was a child she loved. This was a child who trusted her. And then, through the chaos, through the hurried instructions and medical assessments, a small voice broke through. Weak, shaking, barely more than a breath. "Tita, please." Everything stopped. The machines hummed. Snow tapped against the window. The doctors paused mid-motion, glancing toward the royal for instruction. And Amelia? Her heart nearly broke. She stepped forward, slowly, her hands trembling not from fear, but from the overwhelming instinct to protect. The doctors hesitated. Protocol dictated she step back, that only designated medical and royal personnel attend to the heir during crisis. But before anyone could deny her, the senior royal raised his hand. His voice was steady, but filled with something no one had ever heard from him before. Let her through. The room parted for her like a path had been waiting. She moved towards the child and lowered herself to the floor, not with urgency, but with reverence. She placed one gentle hand on his burning forehead. His small fingers reached for hers, as if it was the only thing tethering him to safety. And then, softly, she whispered a prayer from home. Not in English, not in royalty-approved formality, but in the language of her childhood, the language of comfort. Panginoon, manatili ka, bigyan mo siya ng lakas, bigyan mo siya ng kapayapaan. Lord, stay near, bring strength, bring peace. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried something deeper than sound, something known first by the heart. Slowly, impossibly, the child's breath steadied. His trembling eased, his expression softened. The tight grip of fear loosened, replaced by trust, pure and instinctive. A doctor quietly checked. His vitals again. Numbers improved, muscles relaxed. A nurse blinked back tears. And though no one dared speak it aloud, every person in the room understood something profound. Medicine can treat illness. But love? Love can reach where medicine cannot. In that moment, the palace finally saw what the royal had already known. Amelia was not just a caregiver, not just a nanny, not just staff. She was the child's anchor, the quiet presence whose love could calm storms even doctors could not. And from that night forward, no one questioned the decision again. When the danger finally passed and calm returned to the room, the doctors finished their notes, packed their instruments, and stepped back with quiet relief. The child now slept, breathing steady, face relaxed, small hand still loosely holding the edge of Amelia's sleeve, as if unwilling to let her go even in dreams. The palace, moments earlier filled with urgency, now felt still, as if time itself had slowed in reverence. Amelia slowly rose to her feet, careful not to disturb the child. Her palms were still warm from holding him. Her knees trembled from kneeling so long on the cold floor. She released a quiet breath, one she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She turned to leave, believing her part in the moment was complete. But before she reached the door, the senior royal stepped forward. He didn't command her attention. He didn't speak immediately. He simply stood there, hands clasped loosely, eyes soft, posture stripped of the formality he was known for. For a rare moment he wasn't a royal, he was a father, a grateful one. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't steady. It wavered, carrying the weight of realization rather than authority. "You didn't just care for my child," he said quietly, almost like a confession. Amelia froze. Her breath stilled. She lifted her gaze slightly, not fully, just enough to meet his eyes with humility. The royal swallowed, emotion thickening his tone. "You gave him a home inside his own heart." It was not flattery, not politeness, but truth, raw, vulnerable, undeniable. No one else in the room dared move. No one dared interrupt. He took a slow breath, then continued, but this time with the decision and certainty of a man who had already made up his mind. "Your salary will be increased," he said, "not for service, but for sacrifice." Silence deepened. He continued, "You will be given private living quarters inside the estate, a place that is yours, where you can rest properly." Amelia blinked, confused, stunned, overwhelmed. She had never asked for comfort, never expected privilege. She had come only to work, to send money home, to survive. Before she could process his words, the estate administrator, the same one who had led the restructuring, stepped forward. "Your Highness," he began carefully, "for the sake of policy—" But he didn't finish. The royal lifted a hand, not with anger, but with finality. His voice was calm, but it carried power that left no room for negotiation. "Skills can be hired." A pause, a breath. Loyalty must be earned. The administrator lowered his gaze. And then, the final line. Soft, unshakable, true. "Love cannot be replaced." The words settled through the room like something sacred. No one argued, no one questioned, because everyone knew what Amelia gave was not written in any contract, not taught in any training, not demanded by any royal decree. It came from somewhere deeper, from culture, from faith, from memory, from heart. And in that moment, the palace understood something it had never needed to learn before. People can serve a family, but very few become part of it. Amelia, quietly, humbly, without asking, had done the impossible. She had become irreplaceable. Life continued. Days folded into weeks, and weeks into months, but nothing returned to what it once was. The palace still held its traditions, its routines, its expectations carved from centuries of lineage. Yet there was a subtle shift in the air, a quiet change no decree had announced, but everyone could feel. The child no longer walked behind Amelia, the way royal custom dictated staff should follow. Instead, he held her hand beside him. Small fingers wrapped around hers with the confidence of someone who understood, instinctively, where safety lived. Some staff exchanged startled glances the first time they saw it. Footmen hesitated mid-step. A lady-in-waiting paused, unsure whether to correct or admire. But no one intervened, because the senior royal had seen it too. And he smiled. Not a formal, practiced royal smile, but the kind that softened eyes and erased years of duty from a face. When guests visited, diplomats, distant cousins, aristocrats wrapped in impeccable etiquette, they would sometimes glance at Amelia, curious, politely unsure where she fit within the palace hierarchy. And inevitably one would ask, "Who is she?" Before any adult could respond, the young heir would turn with the fullness of innocence and certainty and say proudly, "She's family." A statement free of hesitation, free of explanation, free of apology. The first time it happened, there was a silence. Not awkward, but reverent. Some guests blinked, caught off guard, some smiled softly, and one older duchess, known for her strictness, pressed a hand to her chest, as if somehow reminded of something she once believed in but had forgotten. No one corrected him, not the royal, not the advisers, not the staff, because in that moment everyone understood. In the heart of a child, titles mean nothing. Status means nothing. Bloodlines mean nothing. But love? Love means everything. And Amelia, with her gentle voice, her quiet strength, her unwavering presence, had become more than a nanny. She had become the memory the child would carry long after royal. Tutors, etiquette instructors, and formal protocol faded from relevance. She had become the steady voice in stormy nights, the hand that soothed fear, the warmth that spoke louder than words. She had become home, in a world where everything else was expectation, and in a palace built on history, power, structure, and legacy. It was love, not rules, that left the deepest mark. Years later, time reshaped the boy into someone unrecognizable from the child he once was. The chubby cheeks had sharpened into defined features. The small, unsure steps had become steady, poised strides, and the playful laughter that once echoed through nursery walls now carried the measured tone expected of someone shaped for leadership, dignity, and duty. He stood tall, shoulders back, chin lifted, the exact posture generations before him had been trained to perfect. But there was something different about him, something softer, something the royal tutors could not take credit for. One afternoon, during a private conversation far from flashing cameras and public obligations, someone asked him, a question meant to reveal his upbringing, not his title. "Who taught you kindness?" For a moment he said nothing. He could have listed names, tutors, instructors, advisors, diplomats. He had learned manners from ambassadors, negotiation from experts, discipline from tradition. But kindness? Kindness had only ever come from one place. His lips curved into a gentle, almost nostalgic smile, and with a quiet certainty that felt older than his years, he answered, "A Filipino woman who showed me that love is stronger than protocol." The room grew still, not because the answer was dramatic, but because it was honest, unfiltered, human. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the palace and the soft orange glow of lamps filled the corridors, Amelia walked slowly toward the nursery-turned-study, unaware her name had been spoken hours earlier in reverence. She still tied her hair in the same simple bun. She still walked with quiet steps. And she still carried her rosary, worn smooth from years of prayers spoken during moments of hope, worry, gratitude, and faith. To most, she looked unchanged. But her legacy? It echoed through the halls. Children grow, rules evolve, titles shift. But the kind of love that roots itself deep inside a person, the kind that teaches gentleness instead of superiority, empathy instead of authority, that love becomes generational. Somewhere in the palace, as chandeliers dimmed and the world outside slowed, Amelia folded freshly laundered clothes with the same care she had given since her first day. She did not consider herself extraordinary. She did not seek recognition. She simply served, not as a servant, not as an employee, not even as a caregiver, but as something far deeper, something irreplaceable, the woman whose love rewrote tradition. And though history books may never speak her name, a royal heart would carry her legacy long after titles faded and crowns changed hands. Because true impact, the kind born from humility and compassion, does not need applause. It lives quietly, steadily, forever. Sometimes the world measures importance by titles, wealth, or power. But real legacy, real impact, comes from the people who give love without expecting applause, and whose presence makes even a palace feel like home.